1:30 p.m. on Thursday, April the 11th, 2019. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you all for being here today. And I would like to acknowledge that we are within the territory of the Sechelt First Nation. Prior to adopting the agenda, our regularly scheduled vice chair is unable to be here today. So I would like to ask for a motion to approve, either or nominate the alternate director for Sechelt, Alton Toth, as our vice chair for this meeting. Moved and seconded. Any debate on the motion on the floor? Or an arm wrestling match. We could rock, paper, scissors. Yes, Director Hiltz?
Thank you, Alton, for stepping up.
Okay. He was voluntold. So, seeing no more debate on the question on the motion. All those in favor? Motion carries. None opposed. I didn't see any hands up. So, may I ask for a motion to adopt the agenda? Make sure that we have an amended agenda ahead of us today. There is one Planning and Community Development Committee recommendation from earlier today that has been added as number 4 or page 16 of your package. So I'll look for a motion, please. So moved and then seconded. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Agenda is adopted as amended. Okay, so moving on, regular board meeting minutes of March 28th, 2019. Annex A in your packages, pages 1 through 12. May I have a motion to receive and adopt, sorry. So moved and seconded. Is there any discussion or errors, omissions, additions to those? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes or unfinished business? Okay, seeing none. We have no presentations and delegations here today. So the next on our list is the reports. May I have a motion to receive all the reports, please? So moved and seconded. All those in favor? Motion carries. And then we'll move on to Annex B, the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee recommendations, numbers 1 through 9 of March 28th, 2019. Directors, are there any of those recommendations you would like to pull out and discuss separately, or else I'll be looking for a motion to adopt all of those recommendations as presented? Any that you'd like to pull out? Okay, seeing a quiet bunch now all of a sudden, you know.
Must be me.
Yes, I'm blaming Alton. So may I have a motion to adopt those recommendations? So moved, seconded. Any further discussion on those? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Okay, number 4, the late addition to our agenda, the Planning and Community Development Committee recommendation of this morning. May I have a motion to adopt? So moved, seconded. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. None opposed. We have no communications. We have no motions. We have no bylaws today. I think we took care of them all 2 weeks ago. But we do have directors' reports, and I have my list. And I'm going to start in the District of Sechelt with Director Lamb, please.
Whatever. Make it. I'm going to make it very short and sweet. Anyways, District of Sechelt, we've had a sewer expansion going up Wakefield Road that we've had some problems with. It's been delayed. Just with construction work anyways, we had a meeting with the residents up there, and hopefully, well, I think it's supposed to have been finished up by now. And then we're getting into our final rounds of budget, so we had budget meetings on Wednesday, yesterday, just to get down to the final strokes with that. That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lamb. I'm going to move down towards Area E in Elphinstone. Director McMahon, please.
Gee, thanks. I had the Elphinstone Community Association meeting last night. I want to say thank you to the town of Gibsons, to Dave Newman, who came to face the wrath of the people who live along Pratt Road, and to Ilaria Ladwig, who also came out to meet with the community. I think the meeting went as well as could be expected, given that we can't solve all the problems with Pratt Road or reverse the decision to develop Gospel Rock. Mainly, I just could comment that we've been to a bunch of conferences. And a few of the things that I picked up from the High Ground Conference, District of North Van and their natural hazard strategy for dealing with creek slopes and wildfire. And that was really interesting to me. They have similar challenges to us. Yes, carbon emissions and getting to zero emissions on home heating is going to be a really interesting problem. Especially, it's a problem overall because heat pumps, which is what is being recommended, are expensive. And particularly in rural areas where people maybe don't have a lot of money and there may be not a lot of companies around that support heat pumps, it's an issue. And I have a lot more to say about that, but not right now. The City of Vancouver's Climate Action Plan is due to be published on April 24th, so let's all see what they come up with. They are better resourced than all the rest of us. The Water Stewardship Symposium in Parksville was excellent. I took 14 pages of notes. I am not going to share 14 pages of notes with you, lucky for you. But the Streamkeepers work was great. The fact that the Victoria Streamkeepers on Bowker Creek have a 100-year plan, I think that's great. That's as Darnelda would say, that's bold. You know, it took us 100 years to get into this mess, and it may take us 100 years to get out of it. I sincerely hope not, because we're in a lot of trouble if it does. But still, you have to have the bigger picture and the longer picture. I've found lots of good terminology like creek shed and restorative land development that will be wonderful to work for. I learned a lot more about hydrology. I found a few quotes that I really like water moves downhill regardless of who owns the land. Ain't that true? And I was very impressed, as I think Councillor Beamish remarked earlier today, on the regional district of Nanaimo. And their work on their watershed protection and management plan is terrific. And that's the sort of thing that we need to be looking at. Another thing that was pointed out is that a lot of communities say that they want smart growth and urban revitalization, but what they're actually doing is subsidizing sprawl. And I think that that's something that we need to look at too. Are we putting our money where our plans are? And I guess I'll leave it at that for right now.
Thank you very much. And we'll move next door over to Area F and Director Hilt.
Thank you, Chair Pratt. I'll do two items. I'll start with last night was the West Howe Sound Community Association. Pam Roberts as the tiny house person on the coast did a presentation, and it was kind of summed up that tiny houses are a transition from an RV, which is a temporary dwelling, to a tiny house, which is a full-time dwelling that you can move on wheels. And she is braving the way to navigate through federal legislation, provincial legislation and local government legislation. And she's a trailblazer is what she's saying. So it was a great presentation to see how that fits in. And SERD language is small houses. Hers is still tiny houses. So the other one was the Water Stewardship Symposium in Parksville. Everyone there is dealing with what they would say is humans are now having to adapt to the unintended consequences caused by consumption and resource extraction over 10,000 years. No one started doing this to wreck the world. That's what, and there are a ton of people out there working on it at a grassroots level. And this symposium had a mixture of 1/3 local government, roughly 1/3 stewardship groups, and 1/3 consultants and other people. So this is a mix of what collaboration looks like in water stewardship. And the solution, at least, or one part of the solution for the regional district of Nanaimo, which was led off by the electoral areas, was to have a parcel tax and a service for the drinking water and watershed protection service. And that started out from an action plan. It passed by referendum by 52%, which was a slim margin. And now people love what the results that are coming out of it. And the rural director that I spoke with said, you'd be hard-pressed to convince people to take that service away. So for less than $10 per parcel, they raise over $500,000 a year, and it's really quite remarkable of what they've done. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go up the coast to Area A and Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I must say I kind of enjoyed the last 2 weeks. It was a little bit less hectic paced, but I don't know where it went. I guess I had too much to do. I did attend the Rising to the Challenge in Harrison. It was interesting. It was a little over one way on the political spectrum, but it's still interesting to learn. And I learned a lot there, and I enjoyed it. And I actually would go back again, so that tells me that it's good. The other thing I was working on, fairly significant, was fiber to Egmont. And I met a company called Guai Communications. They're from Haida Gwaii. And what the fiber that was announced quite January 17th last year was to run undersea cable from all the way from Haida Gwaii down to Campbell River, and that was done by a group called City West. And then Strathcona was responsible for running the same underground cable around Vancouver Island and actually over here to the Sunshine Coast. And they run it to where it gets out of the water at the end of a public highway, a public access. And from there, it's the responsibility of private industry to put a terminal on and break it down and carry the fiber to the customer. So they stop there. The Guai Communications actually is interested in doing that for Earls Cove, Egmont, and Francis Peninsula, because that's where they're dropping the cable eventually. And actually, it was interesting to learn that they're going to drop it in 2 points in Egmont, one where they hit it and one in the middle. So, in fact, the last mile to the house is a little cheaper that way. You don't have to start from the main highway and run down the 5 kilometers to Egmont. You start right in Egmont. So it looks like a realistic thing. It's I'm hopeful, not positive. So, anyways, that was interesting. It's going to happen down the rest of the coast, so it's something for us to look at. And there was an article in the Coast Reporter called Strathcona Backbone, and it's still online if you want to Google it, and it tells you all about what's happening. And the reason it's interesting is that it's getting closer now. Then the other thing, I participated in a cleanup of Sarah Hall Yard. They're having an AGM for the Living Heritage, and it's 6 people showed up in 1 day notice, and one of them with a backhoe, and all volunteering their time. It's pretty heartening to see that kind of community involvement. I really enjoyed it. And the really big news, we have a new puppy. Yeah, Oh, are they ever time consuming? Anyways, me and Andreas got a haircut too. Anyway,
Now,
thank you.
that's his news. Over to the town of Gibsons and Director Beamish, please.
I attended the symposium on water stewardship and delegated note-taking to Donna, which I appreciated that she did. 12 pages of, I understand. That's great. 14, good. No, it was an excellent conference, and we already talked about Nanaimo, so I won't repeat that. It was very good. Also, I'd already had some follow-ups from people I met there, sort of thing, sharing information back and forth. I attended the Kofi conference and with Chair Pratt, and I attended on April the 5th, was a Friday, and I'll just run through some of the things that was there. Friday morning, there was a panel of CEOs, talked about mass timber and high-quality, high-value wood jobs. 140,000 people employed in BC, 40% of whom are in the Lower Mainland in the forestry industry. Issues around still around mountain pine beetle, fires, trade issues, caribou protection, concern with lack of provincial consultation on some of these key issues. First Nations, forestry is the largest employer of First Nations in BC and recognized in partnerships and joint ventures with band councils around the province as the way of the future. BC has the highest wood cost in North America. Companies need to diversify and expand operations elsewhere in order to invest and maintain operations in BC. What is needed from the provincial government? Expanded markets, support local industries to be competitive globally, be treated the same as LNG, support and encourage young people to enter the industry. There's a reconciliation panel as well, and that the Terry T.G. of the BC Assembly of First Nations, he emphasized that consent is not a veto, it's shared decision-making, and that's where the First Nations are involved. Doug Call of the province of BC focused on the United Nations Declaration of Self-Determination and Recognition of Rights. Celeste Haldane, the Chief Commissioner of BC Treaty Commission, focused on also on the UN Declaration as well as the 92 actions of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And spoke of the 8 modern treaties and 10 negotiation tables still going forward. Derek Orr of Carrier Lumber spoke on the power of partnerships and the capacity, increasing capacity and knowledge, increased opportunities, profit for health, education and culture, and building wealth to build communities. And finally, Premier Horgan spoke of wildfires. Fires have started already. Community interface fire prevention funding of $60 million this year. Smoke issues and climate change issues that we must respond to. Softwood lumber is still working on the issue as a priority. Coastal forest revitalization, changing conditions, need to keep more logs in BC to support mills and jobs. Interior forestry competitiveness, pine beetle issues, reduced AAC, reduced fiber supply, need to work together to find solutions. What can we do? Participation is not a requirement, it's an opportunity at the table. You may be left, if you're not at the table, you may be left behind. And the industry needs to transition from high volume to high value. And he spoke also of mass timber construction, building large buildings made of wood up to 8 stories. And the BC Museum, as well as other public buildings like St. Paul's Hospital, to be built using cross-laminated timber and mass timber construction. So I found it to be a worthwhile spend of a morning. So hearing this, I didn't know as much about the forest industry, but certainly some very prominent people there and good discussions. And so that was Friday. Town of Gibsons has given direction to staff for this 2019 budget, and we look forward to having some public consultation now and information coming out about that. Also, we had our appointments to our Planning and Development Committee. Clifford Sutton and Scott Kirk were appointed as the community members to the Planning and Development Committee. And that committee will be in operation probably in May fully. So we had a student demonstration outside our office on Friday, which I missed. But was good is they're concerned about climate change. And I think after the demonstration, they were invited in to talk to our administrator and one of our counselors about the things that was doing through the town of Gibsons. And there's going to be a follow-up forum or meeting with students from the high school on climate change. So I'm looking forward to participating in that. So that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Beamish. We're going to go speak to our other director from Seashelt, Alternate Director Toth.
Thank you very much. And apparently I still remember how to work the microphone. We had a meeting recently with all of the Seashelt community associations about OCP and zoning updates that are coming hopefully this year. We also met yesterday with the Sunshine Coast Community Forest to learn a bit more of the background around how they came to be, the numbers that they work with in their logging and their harvest, and sort of where they see themselves headed in the future. All of our council is headed to AVICC this weekend. The Seashelt Visitors Center will be reopening on April 20th. Sunshine Coast Tourism is going to be operating it for us. And myself and Councillor Rowe are working on a water reuse project that we're hoping to talk a bit more about soon. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. And over to Director Ties with a snazzy new haircut.
Thank you. Well, you've taken about half my director's report. I've actually got a fair amount to report this time around. Newsletter, I put one out again at the beginning of April that covered all of March and does a bit of a look forward. Big mention to the Dakota Ridge volunteers and staff, and the Dakota Ridge Nordics had 110 kids enrolled this year, so that's a record. And it's a great way for our local kids here to go and experience snow. And so just wanted to give a shout out to that one. I was also fortunate enough to be subbing in for Chair Pratt at the local government TV show. And so that was a neat experience. In light of the AVICC, I drafted up a little speech on climate emergency in case I'm called to do one. And I wish I had created that speech before that local government TV show happened, because then I would have been much more well spoken. But anyway, I think it went okay. I also did some office hours at the Gumboot, which I do at the beginning of every month, and I had some really good conversations. One of them was about that the market realities of actually incentivizing people to build another house on their property to actually rent it out for a single family, it's just not realistic anymore. So in our review of Bylaw 310, we should maybe have a look at maybe allowing duplexes with a sort of certain limit to square footage and that kind of thing, so that we might be able to house two families in a duplex or something like that, rather than just one single family dwelling. I also had some conversations around the bottom of Gulf Road about beach fires and concerns around that, as well as parking and turnarounds, but that's ongoing. At High Ground, a couple of the highlights were, one was that wildfire study that the District of North Vancouver did that Director McMahon mentioned, and I ended up following up with Richard Bowes from the District of North Vancouver there, and they got a few FCM grants in order to do a study on wildfire behavior on their slopes and where it would head, and those areas that were identified as being high hazard now have to abide by the national standard for houses that are built according to those fire codes. So that's something that we might want to see in the future. Having a look at that here, and then I was also at the reconciliation workshop, and where some First Nations representatives were there, including Hetsilim from the Squamish Nation. So, and the key message I got out of that one was one is that we need to really work on our engagement with the First Nations, not only at the elected level but also at the staff level. That the staff are the ones that provide continuance, whereas the elected officials can come and go. So that it's really incumbent on everybody in the organization to really foster those relationships. And we also have to be aware of what we say. And one great example was at the High Ground Conference. There was a speech by somebody who said that the corridors along new transportation routes and how the land value increase, how all that money just goes to the developers, and we don't really get a slice of it, even though we're putting in all the infrastructure. And that is potentially the greatest land theft in Canadian history. And that, of course, would not be something that the First Nations would agree with. So just being aware of what we say and in what context is certainly something that should be a top of our minds in these kind of things. I was at the Director Seegers and myself went to the Sunshine Coast, I believe that's the acronym, Sunshine Coast Assisted Housing Council, SHAC. Is that what they stand for? I think so. Affordable Housing Council, that's the one. And they call themselves SHAC, yeah. But that was really nice, and I want to commend all the organizations on the coast in their engagement in making all these new shelter spaces available. There's 40 shelter spaces in Sechelt coming online in the next 2 weeks, which is amazing. And then we've got hopefully by this time next year in Gibson's in the former RCMP buildings, we've got another 40 spaces. So that's a huge increase in shelter availability, and I want to commend everybody that has been involved in doing that. And in Roberts Creek, my focus is in trying to bring more housing online in the 600 to 1,200 square foot range to give opportunity for young families as well as seniors that no longer can take care of acreages, an opportunity to stay within their community. So that's kind of my focus in that regard. As for stream keepers, I have had some conversations with Shirley Samples, and she has started a Sunshine Coast Stream Keepers Association. And they had their first event a couple weeks back, and they had 15 people show up in the area of Malcolm Creek and did an ivy pull. And I think we'll be hearing a lot more from the stream keepers here on the Sunshine Coast. And they've got another ivy pull happening April 20th. So if you need me to get you in touch with her, I'd be happy to. Yeah. And that's it for me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I guess I'll do a little brief report on where I've been the last 2 weeks. First, though, I would like to acknowledge, and I meant to do this at the beginning of the meeting, it is Volunteer Week. And just like to take a moment just to acknowledge that this organization, nor would most of the organizations on the Sunshine Coast be as successful as they are without the spirit of volunteerism that we have within our community. So thank you so much to all the volunteers. We have everything from our firefighters to our people who, volunteer soccer coaches, to the stream keepers is a great one too. We have so many incredible volunteers on the Sunshine Coast community or within the Sunshine Coast community, and just thank you for everything that they do for all of us. I'm going to rewind to High Ground. Mayor Seegers and I presented a Pecha Kucha on the Women's Campaign School. And we got a great response to that because, of course, we have 55% of the elected positions on the Sunshine Coast are held by women. And then another stat that's a little bit sadder than that, 4% of all tradespeople are women. Only 4%. So it's another thing that came out of the conference was the presentation by the Women in Trades, and something to think about. As one of my daughters has done carpentry and some electrical as she's been going through school and is actually looking at becoming an engineer when she graduates, unless she's accepted into the Coast Guard Academy. It's something that's really important to our family, is to see more women in trades, because you cannot be what you do not see. Was at the Council of Forest Industries last week, as I reported on earlier today. It was a great conference. It was very informative. Made a lot of great connections, including a meeting with the Premier, which was really neat. Thank you to Director Beamish for arranging that. He motioned, while I was bent down picking up my purse, he motioned to the Premier like this, caught his eye, and he came. I stood up, and there's the Premier right in front of me. So it was a chance meeting, but it was a nice little conversation, and we'll see him again this weekend at AVICC, which is great. And then also met with Minister Donaldson briefly as well, and that was even though it was it was a very productive meeting, along with his deputy minister, met him as well, and creating a few new contacts that will hopefully move a lot of things forward. So looking forward to what else we can do. Last night was the Self-Employed Women's Network AGM. Once again, Mayor Seegers and I spoke at it, which was it was well received. There's about 50 women there, so there's a lot of self-employed women on the Sunshine Coast, and it was great to see them all together. It was a really nice event. Also, last week, when I was home for a day, there was a Ferry Advisory Committee pre-meeting. So just for everybody, because there's been a lot of turnover on the Ferry Advisory Committee, so just for everybody to get to know one another and prep and for our official meeting that'll be coming in May. Upcoming, of course, we have the mock public meeting this afternoon, which I'm really excited about. I can see what the process is around there. And then AVICC this weekend. I'm glad to hear so many of the Sunshine Coast team is going to be there, and it's going to be really exciting to make connections with other Vancouver Island and coastal community elected members. Coming up, I have a phone call meeting with our Member of Parliament next week, Minister Trevenna's office later today, some people from Minister Donaldson's office later today as well. So it's a busy day. So with that, I think that's my reports, and I think we've got everybody around the table now. So other than that, we have no new business. And we do have an in-camera session, so I'm going to ask for a motion that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with Section 91ACI of the Community Charter. Personal information about an identifiable individual, labor relations or other employee relations, and the receipt of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege. If I can ask for that motion, please. So moved and seconded. All those in favor? Motion carries. We are going to adjourn from our open meeting. May I have a motion for that? So moved and seconded. All those in favor? Motion carries. And then